Welcome, everyone. And what a rock star passage that is. It's like an epic novel. We see the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. The walls of Jericho tumble down. And we're reminded that these things happened because of acts of great faith, because people did what God had asked them to do. We're reminded of Gideon and Samson and David and the great things they did through faith, again, because they listened to God and did what they were asked to do. This lectionary reading fits really well in with what we were talking about last week. We heard from David the really reminder not to get so caught up in the acts of religion that we forget what we're here to do, that we forget the marginalised people, we forget our neighbours, that we forget to reach out for others. And the reading before this, because you get about 4 readings to choose from, and the reading before this from Isaiah, which is sort of the companion following on reading from last week, it spoke about a people who had lost their purpose. And they'd lost their purpose because they'd allowed the shedding of blood and tears to be in the world rather than justice and righteousness. So what I love about this reading is when you get to the Hebrews reading, it gives us a plan about how to live our life with purpose and with joy. So, what we get to in this reading, and there's part of it that I found really, really challenging, is the bit you get to when you're told about all these Bible heroes. These people stormed cities, they fought wars, they crossed the Red Sea after making the waters part. But then we are told, even after they tortured and they suffered and they died, and that's not even the people, it's also the animals. It was quite comprehensive. We're told that they did not get what they were promised. And I found that really confronting because we're told their faith was great and they were commended for their faith. And so I did a bit of reading, and then I discovered that when they refer to the promise here, they refer to the great promise, the promise that Jesus will return to this earth. And so that promise was one that was always happening in the fulfillment of time. And the passage goes on to say that these great heroes did not get what they were promised because it was up to us as well. We had a part of it. I felt really connected when I read that to the Bible heroes, to the chain of continuity, to the people who may have sat in the temple and heard Jesus preach, to the people who went and ate bread and drank wine with Jesus. All of these people, all of the disciples, were all together in a chain working to make the world a better place. And I thought, wow, that's a reason to get out of bed, yeah? Unless, of course, it sends you screaming back under the doona, under the weight of expectation. So, it's a very good thing that the writer of the passage doesn't leave us there. It's not up to us to save the world just today, at least not alone. So, what I really loved, and these are some of my new favourite Bible verses. I really love them, and so we're going to read them again because this is what I'm going to focus on. It's the start of chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So we're not alone in facing this challenge. We're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Now there's a great power in witnessing events, and witnesses at events can be a great support as well. Now, this year is the 10th anniversary of my mother's death, and it was her birthday on Friday. And I remember her funeral. There were so many people they could not fit in the church, and it was a large church in suburban Brisbane. People were overflowing, people had travelled from overseas, and we'd all come. And even today, when I reflect on that, the number of witnesses that came to hear about her life at that funeral gives me a great deal of comfort. And when I had to walk down the centre of the church and I saw her coffin there, the fact that I was surrounded by all those people who considered this a very important thing to go to and important in their lives gave me a great deal of support. And on another one, and this is because these are good Olympic verses too. I was in the stadium in the Sydney 2000 Olympics on the day that the women's marathon was run. And what an experience that was. I sat in the stadium and we were watching the track and field, and there were screens around everywhere. And you were watching the women as they ran their 42 kilometres. And as they got closer, you got more focus on them. And then all of a sudden, the lead runner was approaching the tunnel. Now, in the Olympic Stadium, to get into the stadium, the runner runs through a very narrow, quite dark, concrete tunnel. It's very utilitarian. It's not pretty. There is no one there. There are no crowds. There is no support. You are running in silence, almost dark and alone. And you're seeing her running through that tunnel. I'm just about to cry now. I cry every time I think of it. And then she came out into the stadium. She was a tiny, tiny woman from Japan. She'd just run almost 42 kilometres, and she still had to do another lap of the stadium. Her face, when she came out, the crowd went wild. And you could see it on her face. She smiled. They had an amazing sound song went on. And as she ran around that stadium, the crowd rose to meet her. They carried her on that journey around the stadium. But not only her, they did it for each and every athlete that came through right to the very last one. And I think the last woman got the biggest cheer of all because she was still in that race. And what I noticed each time as they came out, the surprise and the joy when the crowd greeted them as they burst out of that long, dark, harsh tunnel into the bright light and the welcoming of the stadium. Every single one of those women felt the support. And I tell you, it was magnificent. Witnesses can also make things real. It prevents us denying what happened or that something took place. And look, don't we all know, it's not really real unless it's been Facebooked. And so we post on Facebook, we get validation, we get support, we get acknowledgement, and well, at least this is what goes on for me, okay? And I feel, oh, yeah, people like what I do, I must be okay. So we have our great cloud of witnesses while we're running our race. Then we're encouraged to lay down every weight and sin that clings to us. I think the concept of clinging to us, they were the words in a slightly different translation from the Bible we're reading from today. And I tell you, the relief I felt, like I can let it down. I don't have to carry my past or my history or the not so nice things I've done with me. They don't need to define me. I can lay them down and I can continue on. And that just filled me with so much relief and joy. So what we're doing is we're then encouraged, let's look to Jesus as our example. Now, another thing about me, because you'll end up knowing a lot about me, is that I catch myself comparing myself with others. This is something that I've struggled with my whole life. I look at other people and I think, oh, the CEO likes that woman better than me. I'd better be like she is, because then maybe the CEO will like me more. Now that didn't go well for me. Not surprisingly, it was not successful and it did not lead me to happiness. Other thoughts, he or she is doing better in life or in their career than I am. That just leads me to thoughts of dissatisfaction and bitterness. And I tell you, it didn't help me make any friends. Other thoughts that go along through my head, and this happens, frequently. Sometimes it used to be 24/7, so it's cut down significantly. Things like her faith, it's stronger than mine. Oh, their house, it's bigger than mine. Oh, they've got more yard. Oh, they cook better than me. Gosh, they've managed to put their makeup, jewellery and hair together better. Her husband must love her more than me because he gives her much more expensive gifts. Why don't I get gifts from my husband? And frankly, I tell you, my husband makes me tea anytime I want it. I have struck the jackpot. I can buy my own jewellery, but making that tea, that's where it's at for me. So until I reached that level of acknowledgement, none of those thoughts were helpful to me. In fact, I got lost in them for years. So when we're encouraged to fix our example on Jesus, it lets you step away from all of those unhelpful thoughts, all of the dissatisfaction that you might have, all the needing to do things to win friends, influence people, have people like you more. And I can tell you that when I let down all of those things, my life became richer. I have such a lovely group of friends and who would do anything for me and accept me messy, and I joyfully invite people into my rather chaotic house. Simon somewhat less joyfully, but he's getting there. So this is the point in the reading where I start to hear my mother talking. So my mother had a very strong view of what was right. Now, what the world considered right, or what the proper thing was, or the done thing, mattered not one iota to my mother. She just did not care. She had a very strong internal compass, and she would always do what she felt was right. And what I loved about her is she would also take other people along with her. I don't know if it was forced or chivying or inspirational, but there was a story, and this story was told at her funeral, which is where I'd first heard of it. And this was about 40 years ago, and there was a big flood in Aspley in the northern suburbs of Brisbane, and there was a caravan park, and a lot of people lived in that caravan park full-time. They didn't have houses, they didn't have a lot of money, that was their home. And the river rose, caravans were washed away, people lost all their clothes, they lost food, they lost their furniture, they lost all their worldly possessions, and they didn't have the money to replace them. Now, 40 years ago, when something like that happened, it wasn't the trendy or the done thing to rush in and offer help and donate like it is now. And my mother thought, well, something needs to be done. My mother was always thinking something needs to be done. The difference was she went ahead and did it. She went to the minister of a local church. You can probably feel relief that Mum is not a member of our church, Dave. And she said, what are we doing? And the minister says, well, they're the local caravan park. We don't really know much about that. I'd never given a thought that we might do something about that. He was a really excellent minister, by the way. He sounds a bit cold and hard-feeling. He wasn't at all. And so before you knew it, my mother had organised supermarkets to donate food. People donated furniture. People donated clothes. And the people in that caravan park were looked after. And she never once considered that that was not the right thing to do. She would pick up hitchhikers, and I'd come home, oh yes, we picked up a hitchhiker on the way. We gave them a lift and they were lonely, they were missing their family. So we had them back to our place for a night to give them a bit of family experience. I cooked them a roast dinner. Like, that's brave, Mum. But that's what she did. So so now we get to our challenge, because this reading I find very inspirational, but it also lays down a challenge to us all. So the start of the challenge is that when you stop looking at the example of others and stop comparing yourselves against them, you are not then able to use the example of others or compare yourself to say that you are better than others, or to say, that person gets away with that. I really know that I could do a bit more, but they're doing that and that's okay, so I'll get away with that too, which was what used to happen to me at home. I'd get in trouble for something and I'd say, but that kid down the road does that. And this is where I really hear my mother talking. But you, Catherine, you know better. It's like, it never worked, never got away with it. So what we end up here is that whilst we don't get to look at others to say, oh, I'm not as good as them, you can't look at others either to say, I'm better than them. So what does this do? This doesn't mean that you're living by yourself, not at all. In fact, when you stop comparing yourself against others, it allows you to have a real relationship with them, to talk to them, to talk about what's really going on for you and receive an answer. And it removes the impediment that I think sometimes pride and also feeling a little bit less than can put in the way of a relationship. So if Jesus' example is the only one that matters, we're freed from all of that. And it reminds me of that really wonderful song, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim as you live in his glory and grace. I remember singing that one with my grandma. So the challenge continues, because now we're going to have a look at Jesus' example. Okay, so he came to us as a baby to live among us, teaching us, healing us. He probably got in trouble for not doing the dishes or cleaning his room. I'm sure he must have. But all the while he did that, he made friends, he taught, he knew that he was going to die on the cross. From the moment he arrived in our world, he knew he was going to die a horrible, painful, awful death on the cross. But this verse tells us that he did it with joy. He did it with joy to save us, all of us, no matter who we were, what we did, what we're going to do in the future, and what goes on in our heads. Money, status, things, what other people thought, were just not important to him. Now that's a mighty example, and you'd be forgiven if you were running back to the doona. But do you know what the grace of all of this is, and the marvellous thing? We are not required to be perfect. Hallelujah, how fabulous is that? Perfection I struggled with and still going on. That's more than 20 years now. So the reading refers to us running with perseverance. Now, to persevere means to keep doing something even when it's hard, despite the difficulties and even when there's a delay in being successful. It means not giving up, putting in the effort, and to keep doing it until the very, very end. So the story of how I met Simon, that some of you know a little bit about, is one of those examples of perseverance. I was a workaholic lawyer, something that I still struggle with, in Sydney in my 20s. I worked and I played high-level competitive sport, that's it. And at the sport level, I was teaching, so I worked at work and then I worked at sport. I had no time for really relationships, and I had a massive fear of commitment. So I wasn't real good at the romantic relationships. In fact, I think I'd only had one that went over 3 months, and that was a little bit odd, that was on and off. And anyway, so I looked around in my late 20s and I thought, why don't I have a boyfriend? And I thought, and then I went off and I was still working and sporting. And then I thought, I want a boyfriend, I want a husband. I want a husband. At that stage I hadn't reached I want a family, but that came soon after I met the husband. And so I decided to do something about it, much like my mother. We Horgath Morphett women, when we decide to do something, we do it. And so I started dating. I was dating 2 or 3 times a week, every week, for 5 years. I analysed the dates after I went on them. What could I do better, different, whatever, I tell you. It took me a long time to enjoy dating. I had to learn to be with men, to chat to men, not rip away their masculinity, not insist that when they were offered a pay that, and they give me the change, that I insist they take half of it, or even worse, all of it. Sorry. I had to learn to just be. So I went to singles parties with friends and alone. And so I did learn to chat with men, and I learned a lot of stuff. One of the best bits of stuff I learned is that people are basically good, and you can have a really great time with just about anyone for an hour. Just about anyone. But towards the end of the 5 years, I was going on more 3rd or 4th dates, but I never really got any further. Now, if I thought things had been hard, things were about to ratchet up to a whole new level. I now had to call the men I'd gone on dates with who did not want to see me again and ask them why. What had I done? What was the reason? So I did. And I can tell you, I never would have done that. And I didn't want to do it. And that's not what anyone else did. So then I rode off my car and I got whiplash. Yeah. And on a dark and stormy night, I could barely walk, so badly so I had to wear my boots and lace them up. I had a very sore neck. I nearly didn't go. A girlfriend and I went to a party. And that was where I met Simon, my husband. And that journey was long. I think it was probably about 6 or 7 years. And in that time, I cried, both by myself and with friends. I had arguments and discussions that were quite strong with God and the universe, and I prayed. And I did things that other people just don't have to do to find a husband or a boyfriend or a partner. Nobody I'd met had had to do those things, but I definitely had. And what came out of it is that every single step of that journey is worthwhile. And I now have a lovely family. We have a daughter. We have a wonderful group of friends. That in my late 20s, had I not fixed my path on something, I would not have had. I was on a path to work myself to death, an early death. So, the other thing I've got to tell you about this journey too is I didn't make it by myself. I had an unbelievable amount of support and of witnesses. My wedding was very large because it was important for me to people to witness it. And I think everybody was shocked because I didn't tell my family what I'd done, but when I had the people who had supported me on the journey of my relationship with Simon stand up, it was about a third of the people at the wedding. There must have been 40 people maybe stood up, and I think my family was shocked because they just had no idea. So I'm still running my race, and you guys are running your race. We're all running our race together. My message to you today is all we need to do is our very best. But that's your personal very best, using all of the gifts God gave you, not looking to the example of others, not comparing yourself against others. God will know, you will know. Then you notice if you're taking the easy way out. Stop taking the easy way out. Pick yourself up. Forgive yourself. God will. He already has. And continue on. Because we've got to remember here, this is the great joy. Jesus died on the cross for us. Our sins are forgiven, not just the ones in the past, all the ones in the future, for all time. We don't need to worry. We will sin again, and we'll be forgiven again. But we don't do this on our own, and we're not expected to do it on our own. Jesus, God, and our friends, the church that God gave us, are with us every step of the way. And when we do this, when we run our race with our eyes fixed on the example of Jesus, we bring the world closer and closer to the world that Jesus was preaching for and working towards. And this has given me a whole new meaning of the second coming. Because what I noticed through some discussions with David is it used to be that an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, was leading level humanity and compassion. Because it's not, you killed my daughter, I'll wipe out your entire family and their family and their families after them. We ratcheted it back. But now we look at an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And we see that as barbaric. We've moved on to a new model of forgiveness and training. And so everything we do is changing the world. And when I'm thinking about the second coming now, I'm thinking that we together, we're changing the world slowly, slowly. We're all stepping on the shoulders of the generations before us, and the ones after us will move further. And maybe Jesus isn't going to come again to save the world and change the world. Maybe we're changing the world to a world that Jesus will come to. So what I'd like to leave you with is that remember that each and every one of us, we are the joy of Jesus. We are his joy, and together we're changing the world.